I made his favorite meal the night he brought her home. Pot roast with rosemary potatoes, the kind that takes 2 hours and fills the whole house with a smell so warm it almost feels like love. I had the table set with the good plates, the ones we only used for special occasions, and a candle burning in the center. I was standing at the stove, stirring the gravy, when I heard the front door open. And then I heard two voices. One was my husband's, the other was a woman laughing. My hands went still on the spoon. I didn't turn around. I just stood there, facing the stove, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. He walked into the kitchen and stopped. I heard him breathe in sharply, the way you do when something catches you completely off guard. And then he said it. 3 words I will never, ever forget. You weren't supposed to be here. I set the spoon down on the counter, slowly, carefully, like I was placing something fragile. And I turned around. My name is Miriam. I'm 41 years old. I spent 14 years of my life loving a man who apparently needed directions back to his own house before walking through the door with another woman. And this is the story of how I cooked the best meal of my marriage and served it cold. Daniel and I met when I was 27 and he was 31. He was the kind of man who seemed to have everything figured out. Steady job in financial consulting, easy smile, good with parents, good with words. He said, "I love you" on our 4th date, and I thought, this is the man. This is the one who's going to be different. We got married in a small ceremony in Connecticut, just 40 people, in October. It rained that day, which his mother said was good luck. I chose to believe her. We moved into a house in Westport, 3 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen that I immediately fell in love with. I used to joke that I married the house as much as I married Daniel. Looking back, the house had better character. For the first few years, things were good. Not perfect, but good. Daniel worked long hours, which I understood. He was building something, climbing, doing what men like him do. I worked too. I was a graphic designer, freelance, which meant I was home a lot, which suited us both at the time. I handled everything domestic without being asked. The grocery runs, the doctor appointments, the holiday planning, the thank you cards to his clients at Christmas. I kept the life running so he could focus on the career. We had a daughter, Nora, in 2016. She is the single best thing I have ever done. Brown eyes, quick mouth, absolutely fearless. Daniel was a decent father when he was present, which became less and less frequent as the years passed. He traveled for work. At least that's what I believed. Boston, New York, sometimes Chicago. He'd be gone 3 or 4 days at a stretch, come home tired, distracted, barely present. I told myself that was just the job. That was just how ambitious men operated. I believed it because I wanted to believe it. Because Nora deserved a father. Because I had given 14 years of my life to this marriage, and I was not ready to look at what was actually underneath. I should have looked sooner. The first real crack appeared about 2 years ago. I was doing laundry, something I had done 10,000 times without incident, and I found a receipt in the pocket of Daniel's slacks. The Landmark Hotel, New Haven. One night, January 14th. The charge was $312. I remember January 14th clearly. Daniel had told me he was in Boston for a 2-day client meeting. I remembered because it was the night Nora had a fever and I texted him and he'd barely responded. I stood in the laundry room for a long time holding that receipt. I didn't confront him, not then. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I took a photo of it on my phone, put the receipt back in his pocket, and finished the laundry. I don't know exactly what I was doing in that moment. Some part of my brain went very quiet and very deliberate, like something that had been sleeping for years had just woken up and decided it was time to pay attention. Over the next 3 months, I started paying attention to everything. I noticed that his Thursday evenings were always spoken for. Late meeting, he'd say, or drinks with the Callaway account. Every Thursday, without fail. I started noting the times he left and came home. I started noticing which shirts came back smelling faintly of something I couldn't identify. Not perfume exactly, more like a specific fabric softener, something floral and artificial that wasn't mine. In March, my neighbor Beverly mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Daniel's car parked outside the Weathersfield apartment complex on a Tuesday afternoon. He'd told me he was in Hartford for a site visit that day. I said, "Oh, he must have stopped to see an old colleague." And Beverly nodded and moved on, but I filed it away. I filed everything away. I didn't say a word to him. I cooked his dinners. I washed his clothes. I put Nora to bed and sat across from him on the couch and watched television, and I was already, quietly, methodically building my case. The confirmation came in April, 8 months after I first found the receipt. I had hired a private investigator named Sandra. She was 53, worked out of a small office in Fairfield, and came recommended by a woman in my book club whose husband had pulled something similar 6 years before. Sandra charged $2,400 for a 2-week surveillance package, and I paid it out of a personal savings account I had quietly opened 3 months earlier. She sent me the photos on a Wednesday morning while Nora was at school. I was sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee. I opened the email, and there they were. Daniel and a woman I did not recognize, walking into the Landmark Hotel in New Haven. Not January, April, same hotel, different month. His hand was at the small of her back. She was laughing at something he'd said. She looked young. I found out later she was 26, a junior account coordinator at a firm he did business with. Her name was Cassidy. There were 7 photos in total. He had his arm around her in one of them, right there on the sidewalk in broad daylight, like he had forgotten he had a wife and a daughter 40 minutes away who thought he was in client meetings. I sat with those photos for a long time. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying by then. I had known on some level for 8 months. What I felt was something closer to confirmation, a cold, clear, terrible confirmation that everything I had suspected was exactly true. I called Sandra back and asked her to keep going for another 2 weeks, another $2,400. I needed documentation, dates, specifics. She got me everything. That night, Daniel came home at 7:30. I had made pasta, nothing special, just a weeknight dinner. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, and I said, "Fine, busy." We ate dinner. He helped Nora with her math homework. He watched 30 minutes of news and went to bed early, and I sat on the couch after he fell asleep and I made a decision. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. Not until I had everything I needed, because I had read enough, spoken to enough women, understood enough about how these situations go, and I knew that the moment you show your cards, the game changes. Money moves, accounts get shuffled, assets get hidden, attorneys get hired on the other side first. I was not going to let that happen. I called an attorney named Patricia Holloway the next morning. She was a divorce attorney with 22 years of experience and a reputation in Fairfield County that made the opposing side visibly uncomfortable. Her consultation fee was $400. I paid it in cash and I told her everything. She leaned back in her chair when I finished, looked at me steadily and said, "You did the right thing coming in before he knows. Now let's talk about what we need." We talked for 2 hours. By the end of that meeting, I understood exactly what I was doing and exactly what it was going to take. For the next 4 months, I was the perfect wife. I want you to understand what that means. 4 months of cooking his meals, making his coffee, laughing at his stories, sitting beside him at Nora's school events like we were the picture of a solid, happy family. 4 months of sleeping in the same bed as a man I knew with documented certainty had been sleeping with a 26-year-old woman for at least a year, maybe longer. 4 months of watching him lie to my face every single day. He told me he loved me twice during that period. Once on our anniversary, our 13th, and once on a random Tuesday morning as he was leaving for work. Both times I looked him in the eye and said, "I love you too," and I meant neither of them, and I have no regrets about that. He gave up the right to my honesty when he gave up his own. Patricia and I worked quietly and carefully. We documented the joint accounts. We established the timeline of financial behavior. Over the course of 18 months, Daniel had moved $67,000 out of various shared accounts and investments. Small amounts at a time, $2,000 here, $4,500 there, never enough to trigger immediate alarm. The Landmark Hotel had been charged 14 times. There were dinners, weekend trips, once a 4-day stay at a resort in Newport that he told me was a golf weekend with colleagues. Sandra's documentation covered 6 weeks of verified activity. Patricia said it was more than enough. She said, "When we walk into court, he won't have a leg to stand on." I also spoke quietly to Daniel's brother, Marcus, with whom I had always been genuinely close. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. Marcus had suspected something for months himself. He was furious. He told me to do what I had to do. He would not warn Daniel, and he didn't. Which brings me to the night of the pot roast. It was a Friday. Daniel had called me at noon while I was working, with that particular ease in his voice that he used when he felt most comfortable, most certain that everything in his life was going smoothly. "Hey, you think you could make the pot roast tonight with the rosemary potatoes? I've been thinking about it all week." I paused for exactly 1 second, and then I said, "Of course, I'll start it this afternoon." "You're the best," he said, and he hung up. I spent 2 hours on that meal. I want to be precise about this. I made it perfectly. The roast was tender. The potatoes were crisp at the edges. The gravy was the kind you want to drink straight from the pan. The table was set with the good china and the candle I'd been saving for our anniversary. I opened a bottle of the 2019 Cabernet that we'd been keeping for a special occasion. I poured myself a glass, and I stood in my beautiful kitchen in my beautiful house, and I waited. He called again at 6 to say he was on his way. His voice sounded slightly off. A little too casual, a little too controlled, the way voices sound when someone is trying to manage their own nerves. I said, "Dinner will be ready at 7. Don't be late." He wasn't late. He was exactly on time. I heard the car in the driveway at 7:02. I heard the door open, and then I heard her laugh, bright and surprised, right there in my front hallway. The sound of a woman who had no idea what she was walking into. I turned back to the stove. I kept my back to the doorway. My hands were around the spoon, but I was not stirring. I was just standing there, completely still, waiting. He came into the kitchen doorway and stopped. I know exactly what he saw. His wife of 14 years standing at the stove, in the home they shared, with a full dinner on the table and a candle burning. I heard his breath catch, and then he said it. "You weren't supposed to be here." I set the spoon down. I turned around. Cassidy was visible just behind him in the hallway, her coat still on, her eyes going wide as she took in the table, the candle, the wine, and me. She looked young. She looked exactly as young as she was, and she looked suddenly very afraid. I looked at her. I looked at Daniel, and I said very quietly, "Dinner's ready. Sit down." He stared at me. "Miriam, sit down." He sat down. She didn't. She stood frozen in the doorway to the kitchen, and I turned to her and said in the same quiet voice, "You can go. The conversation I'm about to have is not for you." She left. She didn't say a word. She just picked up her bag, which she had dropped in the hallway, and she walked out my front door. I heard it close behind her. I sat down across from Daniel at the table I had set. I folded my hands. I looked at my husband. He started talking immediately. They always do. "This is not what it looks like, Miriam. She gave me a ride. I ran into her. I didn't know you were going to be. I wasn't expecting—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "I know about the Landmark Hotel, all 14 visits." I watched his face go pale. "I know about the $67,000. I know about Newport. I know about every Thursday for the last 19 months. I have photographs, bank records, and a private investigator's full written report." I paused. "I also have Patricia Holloway." That was when I saw the real fear. The name landed like a weight dropped on the table between us. "I had you served this afternoon," I said. "While you were on your way home, you have been served, Daniel. The paperwork is in your name, filed with Fairfield County. Everything is documented. Everything is in order." He looked like he had forgotten how to form words. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I reached across the table and I picked up my glass of wine. I took a long, slow sip. I set it back down. "I made your favorite dinner," I said, "because I wanted you to come home, and I wanted to be the one to tell you, to your face, that it's over. Not through a lawyer's letter, not through a phone call. I wanted you to look at me when you found out that I knew everything, that I have known for months, and that I was smarter than you gave me credit for." He didn't eat the pot roast. He sat at that table for a few minutes longer, not speaking, and then he got up and walked out. I heard his car start. I heard him leave. I sat alone at the table with the candle and the good china and the meal I had cooked for 2 hours, and I had a second glass of wine. The divorce was final 11 months later. Patricia was exactly as good as her reputation suggested. The documented financial misconduct, $67,000 in marital assets moved without consent or mutual agreement, was treated by the court with the seriousness it deserved. The infidelity documentation supported the asset division arguments in ways that left Daniel's attorney visibly defeated across the conference table. I kept the house. The Westport house with the yard and the kitchen I had loved since the day we moved in. I kept primary custody of Nora, who now lives with me full-time and sees her father on alternating weekends. I received a settlement of $218,000, which included both compensatory amounts for the missing $67,000 and the division of investments and retirement accounts that Daniel had apparently been counting on keeping. His attorney tried twice to negotiate a different arrangement. Patricia said no both times. She sent a letter so thoroughly documented and strategically constructed that they didn't try a third time. Cassidy, I'm told, ended things with Daniel shortly after that night. Something about not wanting to be involved in the legal mess. Something about it being more complicated than she'd signed up for. I don't know the details, and I don't particularly care. What I do know is that Daniel spent 6 months living in a rented apartment in Bridgeport, driving the used car he could afford once the settlement cleared, explaining to his colleagues and his family what had happened. His mother called me once, about 3 months after the papers were signed. I let it go to voicemail. I have still never listened to that message. Nora asked me once, about a year after everything was settled, whether I was sad. I thought about it honestly before I answered her. I wanted to give her the real answer, not the easy one. I told her. For a long time, before any of it came out, I was very sad. I was sad and I didn't let myself know it fully. She thought about that. She's perceptive, my daughter. She said, but now? Now, I said. I wake up in my own house, in my own bed, and I am not waiting for anything. I'm not waiting to find out the truth. I'm not waiting to be caught off guard. I know exactly where I stand. She nodded like that made sense to her. It does. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting out of something like this. It's not the big dramatic victory that changes you. It's the Tuesday mornings, the Thursday evenings that are yours again. The house that feels like yours because it is yours. Because you know every corner of it and no one in it is lying to you. I still cook. I cook because I love it, because Nora loves it, because a well-made meal is one of the best things you can offer someone you love. But I never made that pot roast again. I don't need to. That recipe did exactly what it was supposed to do the one time it mattered, and some dishes are only meant to be made once. He asked for his favorite meal, and I gave it to him. I gave him the table set with everything he stood to lose, and I made him look at it, really look at it, before I took it away. That was the best meal I ever cooked, and he didn't deserve a single bite.